Throughout Earth's history, megatsunamis have struck continents and left scars that never fade. A single wave can unleash the energy of several atomic bombs, racing across the ocean as fast as a jet airplane and leaving only moments to escape. What if the next giant wave is already forming beneath our feet? The question isn't if it will happen again, but when. Today, we explore the waves that have already changed the world and the megatsunamis that could rise again. Among the megatsunamis humanity has faced, the deadliest occurred in recent history, the one that devastated the Indian Ocean in 2004. On the morning of December 26th, a festive calm surrounded the coast of the Indian Ocean. On Thailand's beaches, tourists soaked up the tropical sun. Yet deep beneath the silent waters, a tension that had been built up for centuries was about to break loose. At 7:59 a.m., off the coast of Sumatra, the seafloor ruptured. A magnitude 9.1 earthquake, one of the most powerful ever recorded, shook the very core of the planet. The ocean floor thrust upward violently, displacing an unimaginable mass of water and giving birth to a silent menace. Within minutes, a chain of waves began spreading across the ocean, racing at the speed of a jet. Before the devastation reached land, a strange and terrifying sight unfolded along the shores of Thailand, Indonesia, and neighboring countries. The sea suddenly began to retreat, as if the ocean itself were holding its breath. Beaches once blanketed by water now revealed a surreal landscape of wet sand, exposed coral, and gasping fish. This withdrawal of the sea, an unmistakable warning of an incoming tsunami, was fatally misunderstood. Unaware of the danger, many people wandered out into the freshly exposed seabed, mesmerized by the unusual spectacle. Meanwhile, on the horizon, a dark line began to rise. Out of the deep ocean, the waves were almost invisible, but as they neared the shore, they grew into monstrous walls of murky, violent water. The first blow struck Sumatra, where waves up to 30 meters, nearly 90 feet high, crashed into the Aceh province. In an instant, entire villages vanished, and thousands of lives were swept away by the unleashed fury of the sea. The tsunami continued its deadly march, battering the shores of Thailand, India, Sri Lanka, and even reaching the eastern coast of Africa. The scenes of devastation were apocalyptic. Homes shattered, trees ripped from their roots, and vehicles piled up like broken toys. More than 23,000 people lost their lives across 14 different countries, and millions were left homeless. Lituya Bay, Alaska, 1958. The Impossible Wave. On the evening of July 9, 1958, The remote Lituya Bay on Alaska's coast stood as a sanctuary of silence and untouched beauty. Its deep, icy waters mirrored the glaciers and mountains that rose like fortress walls, enclosing a fjord cut off from the rest of the world. A handful of fishing boats rested quietly at anchor, their crews unaware of the geological beast sleeping beneath them. Deep within the Earth, the Fairweather Fault, a massive scar in the planet's crust, had reached its breaking point. At 10:15 p.m., stillness shattered. A magnitude 7.8 earthquake struck the region with brutal force. The quake triggered an immense mass of rock, ice, and soil to collapse from the mountainside, crashing violently into the fjord below. The impact was so colossal that it displaced nearly all the water in the bay at once, creating a monstrous wave. A towering wave of liquid rose to an astonishing height of 524 meters, or 1,720 feet, the tallest ever recorded in human history. More than half the height of the Burj Khalifa, and far exceeding the Empire State Building or the Eiffel Tower, its scale defied imagination. The impossible wave swept across the fjord's slopes, tearing entire forests from their roots and leaving behind a swath of destruction still visible today, a pale scar across the mountainside. Three fishing boats were caught in the cataclysm. Two were swallowed and obliterated by the water's fury. But the third, the Edry, captained by Howard Ulrich and his son, became the centerpiece of a miracle. The wave lifted their vessel and hurled it over the treetops on the opposite shore before setting it back down into the bay. Despite the apocalyptic scale of the event, only 5 people lost their lives, a small toll owed to the desolate isolation of the area. Meteorite S2, the day the sky fell into the sea. About 3.4 billion years ago, Earth was an alien world, a water planet covered by a global ocean beneath a thick orange sky. In that primordial silence, life was nothing more than a faint microbial whisper in the shallow seas. From the depth of the solar system, a messenger of chaos was approaching. A celestial body 58 kilometers, 36 miles wide. A mountain of rock and ice hurtled through space at terrifying speed. As it entered the planet's young atmosphere, it became a second sun, a blinding flash that tore across the heavens. The impact struck the ancient ocean east of what is now South Africa. In that instant, the planet screamed. The collision released an energy so immense it vaporized the sea down to its rocky bed and shattered Earth's crust, carving a wound 500 kilometers, nearly 311 miles wide. The ocean, struck with a force that reshaped geology itself, struck back. It wasn't a wave. It was the entire sea rising in a liquid shockwave. A megatsunami, thousands of feet deep, began to sweep across the planet. When it reached the shores of the newborn continents, that wall of water climbed to the height of a skyscraper, scouring the barren land with annihilating fury. Lisbon, Portugal, 1755, the end of an empire. On the morning of November 1st, 1755, All Saints' Day, Lisbon shone as the opulent capital of a global empire. Its magnificent churches, adorned with gold from Brazil, were filled with worshippers gathered for the solemn Mass. At 9:40 a.m., without warning, a subterranean roar silenced the prayers. The earth awoke with unimaginable fury. For several minutes of pure terror, the ground convulsed, and the city, once thought eternal, began to collapse. The grand cathedrals and basilicas, symbols of divine protection, fell upon the crowds of the faithful, turning into tombs of stone and shattered faith. Palaces, libraries, and homes were reduced to clouds of dust and rubble. The survivors, bloodied and terrified, fled the maze of ruined streets, seeking refuge in the open space of the harbor along the Tagus River. They believed they had found safety, but watched in horror as the waters of the estuary retreated unnaturally, leaving ships stranded on the exposed seabed. Minutes later, a colossal tsunami born in the depths of the Atlantic surged up the river with terrifying speed. The wave struck the city's heart, sweeping through the main square and dragging away thousands who had gathered there in search of safety. But the annihilation was not over. Countless candles lit in homes for the holy day toppled by the quake, set the ruins ablaze. Fanned by the wind, the flames became a firestorm that ravaged the city for 5 days, burning what the earthquake and tsunami had left standing. Lisbon, the jewel of the Atlantic, was reduced to smoldering ashes. The megatsunami of the flood, the Burkle impact. The legend of the Great Flood that reset the world is one of humanity's oldest stories. While mainstream science views the tale as a moral myth or memory of massive floods, a controversial theory attributes it to a cosmic event. The hypothesis suggests that around 5,000 years ago, during the rise of the first cities, a comet crashed into the Indian Ocean. The explosion, releasing energy thousands of times greater than the entire nuclear arsenal of the world, generated a mega tsunami that spread in every direction. Watchmen stood guard atop the baked brick walls of Uruk, scanning the horizon. Accustomed to spotting merchant caravans, this time their eyes refused to believe what they saw. The desert seemed to turn into the sea. A colossal wave, 300 meters, nearly 985 feet high, moved relentlessly inland. The wall of water towered so enormously that the city's defenses looked like mere lines etched into the ground. In an instant, it rose above the walls, devouring fields, homes, temples, and finally the Great Ziggurat, erasing civilization from the face of the earth. This apocalyptic vision would perfectly explain the birth of the ancient flood myth. The few survivors who watched the world vanish beneath the waters would tell of a deluge sent by the gods to start everything anew. Yet most geologists and archaeologists reject this idea. They maintain that the flooding of Ur was caused not by the sea, but by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Krakatoa, Indonesia, 1883. The roar of the planet. During the summer of 1883, the volcanic island of Krakatoa, sentinel of the Sunda Strait, began to stir from its long slumber. For weeks, columns of smoke and ash rose from its cone, a mesmerizing sight for the ships sailing between the islands of Java and Sumatra. Beneath the surface, magma and seawater mingled in a hellish pressure chamber, brewing a fury that would soon make itself heard across the world. In the morning of August 27th, the spectacle turned into a cataclysm. A series of 4 colossal explosions tore the island apart from its foundations. The third, at 10:02 a.m., marked the climax, an eruption so violent it is considered the loudest sound ever recorded in human history. A towering column of ash and rock shot into the atmosphere, ripping the sky apart. The world beneath fell into darkness, a day without sunlight, where only the infernal glow of molten flows illuminated the sea. The collapse of 2/3 of the island into itself displayed an immense volume of water. From that annihilation was born massive tsunamis, walls of water up to 40 meters, or 131 feet high, that crashed onto the shores of Java and Sumatra. The waves didn't flood the villages, they obliterated them. Entire towns were torn from the earth, and 36,000 lives were claimed by the raging sea. Waves generated by the explosion traveled as far as the English Channel and were recorded in rivers like the Thames. But Krakatoa's agony did not end there. For years, ash suspended in the stratosphere painted the skies of the entire world with sunsets of blood-red light. Tohoku, Japan, 2011. The Triple Catastrophe. It was the afternoon of Friday, March 11, 2011. At 2:46 p.m., Japan, a nation built on discipline and technology, moved with its usual orderly precision. Deep beneath the Pacific Ocean, however, a fury restrained for centuries was about to be unleashed. The ground began to shake, not with a passing tremor, but with a violent roar that lasted 6 unbearable minutes. A magnitude 9.1 earthquake, the most powerful ever recorded in Japan, shook the archipelago to its core. On the coast of Tohoku, the quake was an apocalyptic force that split the earth open. The ocean, which had ominously receded, began to return. It was a dark mass of water advancing with unstoppable speed, consuming the towering seawalls that had been built to hold it back. The waves swept over the land, erasing entire cities and towns. Cars, houses, and ships were dragged away and crushed in a vortex of debris. But the catastrophe was not over. As the water annihilated the coastline, it struck the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. The wave overran its defenses, flooded the emergency generators, and cut power to the cooling systems. The cores of the reactors began to melt, unleashing hydrogen explosions and releasing an invisible, enduring enemy: radiation. Nearly 20,000 people lost their lives. It was the day when a prepared nation discovered that there are forces no wall can withstand. The eruption of Thera, 1600 before Christ, the end of a civilization. More than 3.5 millennia ago, the Aegean Sea was the realm of the Minoans, a civilization of artists and seafarers whose power radiated from the island of Crete. At the heart of their trading network stood Thera, a prosperous island of dazzling beauty, an outpost of a world in its golden age. Beneath the island's surface, however, a geological titan was gathering its fury. The volcano awoke, with an explosion that shook the foundations of the ancient world. A colossal column of ash and pumice rock soared to the edge of space, blotting out the sun and plunging the Aegean into artificial night. The city of Akrotiri was buried under a shroud of ash, preserved as a ghostly snapshot of a vanished world. The eruption emptied the magma chamber, and the island's center collapsed in on itself in a cataclysm of fire and stone. That collapse displaced the sea with incomprehensible violence, giving birth to a megatsunami. Waves estimated to reach heights of up to 150 meters, or 492 feet, radiated outward in all directions. The megatsunami crashed against the northern coast of Crete, the heart of the Minoan Empire. The wave obliterated its mighty naval fleet, destroyed port cities and palaces, and poisoned its fertile fields with salt water. It was a mortal blow from which the civilization would never recover. Some believe this story, passed down through generations for more than 1,000 years, became the seed from which the legend of Atlantis was born. Chicxulub, the executioner of the dinosaurs. 66 million years ago, Earth was the kingdom of giants. Across vast plains and coastal jungles, dinosaurs ruled a lush, thriving world, unaware of the death sentence speeding toward them from the cosmos. Out of the darkness of space came an executioner of stone. 10 kilometers wide, about 6 miles across, racing towards Earth at a staggering speed. A silent killer on a direct collision course. As it entered the atmosphere, it transformed into a blazing fireball that lit up the sky, a terrifying omen for the creatures below. The impact struck in the shallow waters of what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, and in that instant, the planet screamed in a flash of unimaginable energy. The collision carved a crater into the ocean, displacing the water and generating an initial wave 1,500 meters, or 4,921 feet high. The megatsunami began its assault. A wall of water crashed into the shores of the Gulf of Mexico. It swept through jungles and plains, drowning massive tyrannosaurs and herds of triceratops in a churning vortex of water, mud, and uprooted trees. The great quake that followed made continents tremble and unleashed tsunamis across the globe, annihilating all life along the coasts. The echo of Etna, the tsunami of Atlit Yam. More than 8,000 years ago, at the dawn of agriculture, a thriving village stood along the coast of what is now Israel. Atlit Yam was an advanced settlement for its time, a community of stone and sea with wells, houses, and a mysterious circle of megaliths rising before the Mediterranean. Its people saw the ocean as a giver of life, unaware of the fury traveling toward them from the far side of the world. Some 1,500 kilometers or 932 miles away, on the island of Sicily, the eastern flank of Mount Etna collapsed. A massive section of the volcano plunged into the Ionian Sea. A megawave was born in that instant, a silent messenger of annihilation beginning its swift journey eastward. For the people of Atlit Yam, the sky was clear and the sea was calm. The threat was invisible, a pulse of energy racing beneath the surface of the Mediterranean. Hours later, without warning, the sea withdrew from the shore. Then it returned. A wall of water crashed upon the village, swallowing the houses, the stone circle, and its inhabitants in an unstoppable torrent. The world of Atlit Yam vanished beneath the waves within minutes, erased from both history and memory. For centuries, the village rested in its watery tomb, a secret of the sea. When archaeologists discovered it in the 20th century, a prehistoric Pompeii emerged before their eyes. The stone structures remained intact, and the skeletons of its final residents lay where they had fallen. Among them, the bones of a mother and child locked forever in an embrace against the fury they never saw coming. Crete and Alexandria, year 365, the horror of the ancient world. At dawn on July 21st of the year 365, The eastern Mediterranean glimmered under the might of the Roman Empire. From the hills of Crete to the great metropolis of Alexandria, the ancient world awoke to a day that would be etched into the memory like a scar of terror. Near Crete, the seafloor convulsed in an earthquake of devastating magnitude, around 8.5. The sea responded in terrifying fashion. As described by the historian Ammianus Marcellinus, the ocean withdrew, exposing its depths and leaving sea creatures stranded in the mud. Then it returned with unleashed fury. A massive tsunami spread through the heart of the known world, surging toward the coast of Greece, Libya, and Egypt. Alexandria suffered the most brutal blow. The wave, rising more than 12 meters, or 39 feet, overwhelmed the harbor's defenses and crashed into the city. The horror reached its climax when entire ships were torn from their anchors and hurled inland, left stranded atop rooftops. Tens of thousands perished in a single day, from the shores of Sicily to the Nile Delta. The devastation was so immense that for centuries its anniversary was remembered as the Day of Dread. Vajont Dam, Italy, 1963. The man-made tsunami. In the Italian Alps, the Vajont Dam stood as a monument to human ingenuity and ambition. It was the tallest dam in the world, an elegant and daring concrete arch designed to dominate nature and generate power for a nation in progress. But facing this symbol of control was Mount Toc, an unstable mountain whose slopes were slowly sliding toward the reservoir. For months, the mountain had whispered its warnings. The ground cracked, trees leaned, and animals showed growing unease. Engineers knew it, yet they trusted that their creation could withstand the fury of a sick mountain. On the night of October 9, 1963, that confidence became the architect of a massacre. At 10:39 p.m., Mount Toc slope gave way completely. A massive block of rock and earth plunged into the reservoir with overwhelming force. The impact was apocalyptic. The landslide displaced half the water in the basin, generating a colossal wave 820 feet high. The wave slammed against the opposite slope before surging above the dam. Ironically, the concrete structure held firm, a useless testament to its own strength. A wall of water, mud, and compressed air swept through the narrow valley. In less than 4 minutes, it annihilated the town of Longarone. Nearly 2,000 people died instantly, leaving the Viant Dam as a concrete gravestone. Alaska, United States, 1964. The Bloody Good Friday. On the afternoon of Good Friday, March 27, 1964, a solemn stillness spread over the vast frozen lands of Alaska. Families gathered in their homes on the eve of Easter, trusting the solid ground that stretched beneath the blanket of snow. At 5:36 p.m., that trust was shattered. A violent groan rose from the depths of the planet. The earth began to shake, unleashing its fury for 4.5 endless minutes. It was the most powerful earthquake in North American history, a giant of magnitude 9.2. Yet its true horror emerged when the ground itself lost its solidity. In a terrifying process known as liquefaction, the streets of Anchorage rippled like waves at sea, opening cracks that swallowed cars and houses whole. The tremor triggered massive underwater landslides in the fjords, creating local waves that reached up to 230 feet high. The village of Chenega was wiped off the map by a wall of water that struck without warning. In the port of Valdez, the dock and waterfront slid into the ocean's abyss, taking with them everyone who happened to be there. The Storegga Slide, 6200 BC, the North Sea Flood. Over 8,000 years ago, at the end of the Ice Age, Great Britain was connected to Europe by a vast plain of hills, rivers, and forests known as Doggerland. This was the lost heart of Mesolithic Europe, a fertile land where tribes of hunters and gatherers thrived, unaware that they lived atop a doomed world. Far away, in the depths of the Norwegian coast, the seabed, burdened by the weight of glacial sediments, had reached its breaking point. In a geological instant, a section of the continental shelf the size of Iceland collapsed and plunged into the abyss. The Storegga slide displaced such a colossal volume of water that it triggered a megatsunami across the North Sea. A wall of icy water surged toward the shores of what is now Scotland and Norway. For the tribes that lived on the plain, it was the end of the world. They watched the horizon rise like a wall of water, crashing down on everything in its path. The wave swept across all of Doggerland, drowning its people and their animals. Within hours, the heart of Europe had turned into a violent sea, and the map of the continent was redrawn. It separated Britain from Europe forever and erased an entire world from existence. The Orphan Tsunami of Cascadia, 1700. On the night of January 26, 1700, the Earth along the Pacific Northwest coast of America broke apart. From Vancouver Island to Northern California, a megafault, the Cascadian Subduction Zone, ripped open in a magnitude 9 earthquake. The land convulsed violently, sinking entire coastlines and wiping out the tribes who lived there. Whole villages vanished into the darkness, leaving behind only legends of a great battle between the Thunderbird and the whale that shook the world. No written record remained. It was a voiceless catastrophe, an apocalypse erased from history. Yet across the Pacific Ocean, in Japan, record keepers noted a baffling event. On the morning of January 27th, without any preceding tremor, a series of mysterious waves struck the coast of Honshu. The sea swelled, flooding villages and rice fields. Samurai and scholars called it an orphan tsunami, a wave without apparent earthquake to announce it. The event remained an unsettling mystery for centuries. It was not until the 20th century that geologists connected the two events, when they discovered a forest of dead trees dated to the year 1700, in the same year the Cascadia tsunami occurred. The ghost story was solved. The native legends were true. Japan's orphan tsunami had a parent, a cataclysm on the other side of the world. Sanriku, Japan, 1896. The Phantom Tsunami. On the night of June 15, 1896, the coast of Sanriku in Japan glimmered with the light of lanterns. Families had gathered on the beaches to celebrate a Shinto festival. The air was filled with joy and gratitude, honoring soldiers returning from war. Behind them, the ocean seemed like a sleeping giant. Shortly after 7:30, a gentle ripple passed through the ground. It was a long, languid tremor, so mild it caused little concern. Accustomed to the seismic whims of their land, the people dismissed it and continued their celebration. The earth had whispered to them, not shouted. But in the depths of the Japan Trench, betrayal was unfolding. An 8.5 magnitude slow earthquake had quietly transferred its energy into the sea, sparing the coast from violent shaking, but charging the ocean with hidden power. Beneath the cloak of night, a massive wave of water raced toward the shore. It traveled in silence, a threat born from a quake no one had feared. Suddenly, the beast rose from the darkness. A colossal wave up to 38 meters, almost 125 feet high, swept over the coastal towns. It obliterated the villages in an instant. The impact was so brutal that many of the 22,000 victims were found with fractured skulls. The Sanriku disaster was etched into history as the Phantom Tsunami. It stood as terrifying proof that the ocean's deadliest threats can arrive without warning. Arica, Peru, Chile, 1868. The Trans-Pacific Monster. On the afternoon of August 13, 1868, the port of Africa buzzed with life on the edge of the Atacama Desert, where the land met the vast immensity of the Pacific Ocean. Anchored in its bay, several ships, including the U.S. warship USS Watery, rocked gently in the calm Pacific waters. Shortly after 5 in the afternoon, the earth beneath the sea tore apart. A colossal earthquake, estimated at magnitude 9.0, struck the coast of South America. For minutes, the adobe cities of Arica and Iquique were pulverized, reduced to clouds of dust and rubble. After the violent shaking, the ocean withdrew in an eerie and terrifying retreat, leaving the ships in the harbor stranded on a suddenly exposed seabed. The survivors watched in silence, knowing the sea would return. And it did. A black wall of water rising up to 69 feet high appeared on the horizon and charged toward the coast. The wave didn't just sweep away the ruins of the city, it claimed the ships as if they were toys. The tsunami lifted the USS Watery, a 1,000-ton gunboat, and carried it onto a horrifying journey over the ruined city and across the desert dunes. Born from one of the most violent tectonic ruptures in history, the tsunami began its relentless voyage across the Pacific Ocean. Hours later, its waves struck the shores of Hawaii and New Zealand. A day after that, its deadly echo reached Japan and Australia. South China Sea Tsunami, 1782. In 1782, the coast along the Taiwan Strait and the South China Sea teemed with life. Hundreds of fishing villages and coastal communities lived in an ancient harmony with the sea, a force that was both their provider and their god. That year, the sea became their executioner. A violent underwater earthquake shook the region, unleashing a fury that spread silently through the water. There are no detailed records of the quake's magnitude or the exact height of the waves, only of the aftermath. A massacre on an almost unimaginable scale. The tsunami struck the shores of Taiwan and mainland China with such speed and brutality that there was no chance to escape. The wave swept through fishing villages, dragging boats, houses, and people in an unstoppable torrent. For the thousands of families who lived by the water, the sea that had given them life took it away in an instant. It was a disaster whose scale is known only through the terrifying number left in local records. More than 40,000 people lost their lives. The Grand Bank Tsunami, 1929. On the afternoon of November 18, 1929, a chill of autumn had settled over the Burin Peninsula in Newfoundland. In the remote, isolated fishing villages that dotted the coast, life followed its harsh, simple rhythm, dependent on an Atlantic Ocean that was as generous as it was unforgiving. Shortly after 5 in the evening, the earth beneath the sea at the edge of the Grand Banks of Newfoundland ruptured. A magnitude 7.2 earthquake shook the ocean floor. The quake triggered a massive underwater landslide, unleashing a fury no one in that part of the world thought possible. Hours later, under a dark sky, the threat arrived. A series of icy walls of water rising up to 13 meters, or 43 feet high, that emerged from the blackness of the Atlantic. The tsunami slammed into the coast with the force of a colossal hammer, obliterating the small towns that lined the bays. Homes, docks, and fishing boats were torn from their foundations and swept into the freezing sea. Saltwater poisoned wells and farmland, and 28 people died of hypothermia in the frigid waters of November. As the disaster struck on land, another drama was unfolding in the deep. The underwater landslide had severed 12 transatlantic telegraph cables in an instant. Communication between North America and Europe was suddenly cut off, as though the catastrophe had silenced the world itself. Tokaido, Japan, 1498. The wave that stripped the Buddha. In the late 15th century, in the city of Kamakura, the great bronze Buddha of the Kotaku in the temple sat in a quiet meditation within the dim light of the magnificent wooden hall. It was a symbol of serenity and divine protection, one of Japan's great marvels, sheltered from the elements by a colossal temple that stood as the pride of the empire. On September 20th, 1498, the earth beneath the Pacific Ocean split apart. An 8.6 magnitude earthquake shook the coast of Tokaido. Minutes later, the ocean struck back. A monstrous tsunami surged towards the shore, a colossal wave that made no distinction between fishing villages and sacred sites. The wave crashed into the grounds of Kotoku-in Temple with annihilating force. The Great Hall, a masterpiece of architecture, splintered and collapsed like paper. The ocean's fury tore the structure from its foundations and swept it away completely. When the waters receded, they left behind a landscape of ruin and more than 30,000 dead along the coast. The magnificent temple was gone, yet amid the wreckage, the great Buddha remained. The colossal bronze statue, 121 tons of serene endurance, had withstood the assault. The wave had stolen its home, but not its calm. Since that day, for more than 500 years, the great Buddha of Kamakura has meditated beneath the open sky, exposed to the sun, the wind, and the rain. Valdivia, Chile, 1960. The ultimate earthquake. On the afternoon of Sunday, May 22, 1960, an uneasy calm hung over southern Chile. At 3:11 p.m., that calm became a memory. The planet unleashed its full power in an event that would become the standard by which all seismic fury is measured. A giant of magnitude 9.5, the ultimate earthquake, roared from the depths. For 11 relentless minutes, the ground convulsed with a violence beyond comprehension. The very geography of Chile was rewritten as the earth tore open, splitting into a network of monumental fissures. The ocean, displaced by the brutal deformation of the crust, drew back from the shore. Then it returned like a leviathan. Waves up to 25 meters, or 82 feet high, devoured entire communities, erasing the town of Puerto Saavedra from the map. The energy released began a silent journey across the vastness of the Pacific, generating strange waves even in lakes and far away as Texas and Louisiana. "15 hours after the rupture in Chile, the wave struck Hawaii, claiming 61 lives. "22 hours later, nearly a full day's journey, the tsunami reached the coast of Japan with enough force to destroy ports and kill another 138 people. Strait of Messina, Italy, 1908. Death at dawn. In the frozen darkness before dawn on December 28, 1908, the cities of Messina and Reggio Calabria slept on opposite sides of the strait. At 5:20 a.m., the earth awoke with murderous fury. A 7.1 magnitude earthquake, brief but savage, shook the region for 30 terrifying seconds. Buildings made of fragile masonry collapsed in an instant. Palaces and homes became tombs of stone and dust, bearing thousands who died before they could awaken. The survivors, dazed and wounded, crawled from the wreckage into total darkness. Fleeing the rain of debris in the narrow streets, they ran instinctively toward the only open space that seemed safe: the shore. On the beaches and docks, a terrified crowd gathered, believing they'd escaped the wrath of the earth. That was when the sea came to claim them. "10 minutes after the quake, 3 massive waves, reaching up to 12 meters or 40 feet high, rose from the strait and slammed into the coast. The tsunami swept away the survivors, dragging them through the ruins of their own cities. Gulf of Moro, Philippines, 1976. Midnight disaster. In the early hours of August 17, 1976, life in the coastal communities along the Gulf of Moro on the island of Mindanao moved on as usual. Most residents were asleep, unaware of the catastrophe forming beneath the seafloor. At midnight, a violent underwater earthquake with a magnitude of 8 struck the Celebes Sea. The epicenter lay dangerously close to the coast, a proximity that made the tsunami's arrival fatally swift. Because of that closeness, the massive volume of water displaced by the quake turned into a tsunami that reached the shore in barely 5 minutes. Before anyone could react or grasp what was happening, 1 or more waves up to 9 meters or 30 feet high crashed against the coast. The darkness hid the approaching danger, turning any attempt to flee into a deadly trap. The result was catastrophic. The tsunami surged inland, erasing entire villages from the map. Thousands were swept away as they slept or tried desperately to escape in the confusion. Mount Unzen, Japan, 1792. The avalanche of fire and water. For months in 1792, Mount Unzen had tormented the Shimabara Peninsula. A series of tremors and a modest eruption had weakened the land and left the population in a state of constant unease. On the night of May 21st, after 2 powerful earthquakes, the mountain gave way. The lava dome of Mayuyama, adjacent to the volcano, collapsed catastrophically. A colossal avalanche of earth and rock thundered down the slope at terrifying speed, a boiling mass of fire and water. The landslide swept through the city of Shimabara, burying entire neighborhoods beneath a torrent of debris and killing thousands in an instant. But the avalanche did not stop at the coast. It slammed into a rocky bay with monumental force. The impact produced a localized megatsunami, a monstrous wall of water that rose up to 100 meters, or 330 feet high. The wave crossed the bay, annihilating the opposite shores before rebounding with renewed fury. In a final act of cruelty, the wave returned to strike the already devastated Shimabara, sweeping away the survivors and completing the massacre. Great Yaeyama Tsunami, Japan, 1771. The Coral Wave. In 1771, life on the subtropical Yaeyama Islands in the Ryukyu archipelago moved to the rhythm of the sea. Its people lived protected by magnificent coral reefs, a paradise on the edge of the world, unaware of the impossible physics about to be unleashed upon them. On April 24th, the earth trembled. The quake, measuring 7.4 in magnitude, was powerful, yet not the kind of mega-earthquake that usually heralds an apocalypse. Nonetheless, the ocean responded with a force that defied all logic. A monstrous wave rose from the sea, reaching an estimated height of 85 meters, or 279 feet in some places. The tsunami's brutality revealed itself in spectacular fashion. It tore 700-ton coral boulders from the seabed and hurled them like projectiles. The wave struck the islands, bombarding them with their own skeletons, pulverizing villages and dragging 12,000 people to their deaths. Today, scattered across the beaches, fields, and forests of the islands, those gigantic coral boulders still lie in silence. Kamchatka, Russia, 1952. The Silent Giant. In the early hours of November 4th, 1952, on the Kamchatka Peninsula, the most remote and militarized frontier of the Soviet Union, the earth tore open. A monstrous 9.0 magnitude earthquake, one of the most powerful in the 20th century, roared from the depths of the Pacific. The quake generated a colossal tsunami that surged toward the coast of Kamchatka and even the Kuril Islands. Waves up to 18 meters or 59 feet high crashed into the city of Servo-Kurlisk, annihilating it almost completely. The first wave sent people fleeing to the hills, only for the second, even larger wave to strike from the opposite direction. It was a massacre. Yet while the ocean screamed, the Soviet state enforced absolute silence. In the midst of the Cold War, news of the catastrophe was classified as a state secret. The outside world learned nothing of the destruction or the lives lost. Officially, the deaths were numbered in the hundreds. However, later estimates suggest that between 10 and 15,000 people were erased from existence, a figure buried behind the Iron Curtain. While the human tragedy was silenced, the wave itself could not be contained. The tsunami crossed the Pacific like a phantom, a messenger of disaster. Hours later, it struck the shores of Hawaii, with fury destroying harbors and spreading chaos. The coming megatsunamis. In the seeming silence of our world beneath the calm of the oceans and the stillness of the mountains, monsters sleep, geological certainties that have been building their fury for centuries. Off the coast of North America's Pacific frontier, from Vancouver down to Northern California, lie a 1,000-kilometer scar, about 622 miles on the ocean floor, the Cascadia Subduction Zone. For more than 300 years, it has been storing tension, slowly bending and warping the continent itself. Yet the geological record is unambiguous. Every 500 years or so, the Titan awakens. When it does, the Earth will tear apart in an earthquake of magnitude 9 or greater, and the planet will tremble with its roar. The coastline will collapse in an instant, as if the continent itself were exhaling its final breath, and then the ocean will answer. A wall of dark, murky water will rise, and in less than 20 minutes, it will hurl itself against the coast. There will be no time to flee, only time to witness the end. Entire towns will be erased, but the true tragedy will strike the great cities. The wave will funnel through the Puget Sound, a mass of water crashing into Seattle's docks and flooding its low-lying neighborhoods. Far from the great fault lines and the frozen sanctuaries of the north, the enemy is not the trembling earth, but the crumbling mountain. It is likely that a future megatsunami will be born from the collapse of one of these towering walls of rock, in a roar that will shatter the silence of a fjord. In Alaska, the Bering Glacier has retreated, removing the natural support beneath a massive and unstable slope of rock. Scientists warn that a collapse is imminent. The impact within the confined waters of the fjord would generate an initial wave of over 200 meters, about 656 feet high, devastating the entire area. The population most at risk would be Whittier, a small but vital port town that serves as a gateway for thousands of tourists and tons of cargo. A tsunami triggered in Barry Arm would reach Whittier in less than 20 minutes, a watery death sentence for its harbor and its people. In Norway, the Geiranger Fjord lives under the shadow of Mount Akerneset, where a 700-meter or 2,297-foot fracture widens each year like a wound foretelling a future collapse. When the mountain falls, a gigantic mass of rock will plunge into the fjord. Towns like Geiranger and Hellesfield, bustling with hundreds of thousands of visitors each summer, could be wiped out completely. It's estimated that a wave over 80 meters, about 263 feet, would strike within 10 minutes, turning a beautiful landscape into a watery grave. In 2001, researchers Stephen N. Ward and Simon Day warned in a study that the collapse of the Cumbre Vierge volcano could unleash a megatsunami. As the wave train moved northeast, it would lose some of its energy, but it would still reach the Portuguese Atlantic, hitting Lisbon and Porto with waves about 5 to 7 meters, roughly 17 to 23 feet high. In the Gulf of Cadiz, the shape of the coastline and the continental shelf would expose Huelva and Cadiz to waves that could amplify within their bays and estuaries before striking. The most severe impact in the United States would occur along Florida's Atlantic coast, where waves could reach between 20 and 25 meters, 66 to 82 feet high. Cities like Miami would see waves sweeping through neighborhoods and main streets, their low elevation and dense coastal development leaving them defenseless against the sea. However, the Canary Islands Volcanology Institute has stated that the likelihood of such an event is very low. And so, while the world carries on, different sleeping giants lay beneath the ocean. They are brutal reminders that the story of tsunamis is far from over. The next chapter may already be taking shape in the depths, in hidden volcanoes or along submarine faults, waiting for the moment to unleash a wave capable of reshaping entire continents. The Earth has already spoken in fury, The question is not if it will speak again, but when.